In 350 BC, Aristotle sat down to define justice, and the first thing he did was tell his readers that they had been confusing two completely different things under a single word. Most people, then and now, believe justice means treating everyone the same. Aristotle argued that treating everyone the same is, in many cases, the most unjust thing you can possibly do. This is not a minor disagreement. It cuts to the heart of nearly every argument you have ever heard about fairness, merit, and equality. Every time someone insists that fairness means identical treatment, they are taking a position Aristotle examined and rejected more than 2,000 years ago. In this video we will examine what Aristotle actually meant by justice, why he split it into two distinct forms, and why he insisted it was a virtue of character rather than a set of rules. Before we go further, if this kind of philosophy interests you, subscribe. We publish new videos every week on ideas that actually change how you think. The text we will follow is Book V of the Nicomachean Ethics, the single most careful analysis of justice in the ancient world, and the foundation on which nearly every later theory was built. Aristotle opens his discussion of justice by noting something that escapes most people entirely, which is that the word justice is used in two radically different senses that we constantly mistake for one. In its broadest sense, he says, justice is the whole of virtue exercised toward others, because the just person is the one who treats his neighbors as they ought to be treated in every respect. This is why, in Nicomachean Ethics 11:29b, he quotes the proverb that in justice every virtue is summed up. However, alongside this general justice he identifies a narrower kind, what he calls particular justice, which concerns the specific distribution of goods, honors, and penalties among people. This distinction matters because the two meanings pull in different directions. When we say a society is unjust, we sometimes mean it lacks goodness altogether, and we sometimes mean only that it distributes things wrongly. Aristotle's achievement was to separate these, therefore allowing us to see that a person could possess many virtues and still be unjust in the narrow sense, by grasping for more than his share. What this reveals is that justice is not one simple thing but a structure with parts. And once you accept that particular justice has its own logic, a much harder question follows, because Aristotle now has to explain how anything as messy as human distribution could ever be made fair. Aristotle's first form of particular justice is distributive justice, which governs how a community shares out whatever is divisible among its members, whether wealth, honor, or office. Here he makes the claim that most directly contradicts the modern instinct, because he argues that justice in distribution is not equality but proportion. In Nicomachean Ethics 11:31a he states plainly that justice involves at least four terms, two persons and two shares, and that the just outcome is the one in which the shares stand in the same ratio as the persons. This means equals should receive equal shares, but unequals should receive unequal shares, measured according to their relevant merit or contribution. Therefore to give the diligent worker and the idle one the same reward is not fairness, but a violation of fairness, because it treats unequal cases as if they were equal. And yet Aristotle is careful to add that everyone agrees distribution should follow merit while disagreeing fiercely about what merit means. The democrat measures by free birth, the oligarch by wealth, the aristocrat by virtue. What this reveals is that the deepest political quarrels are not about whether to be fair, but about the standard by which fairness is measured. But this raises a harder question, because not all justice involves dividing goods among unequal people, and Aristotle knew it. Alongside distribution, Aristotle identifies a second and opposite kind of particular justice, which he calls corrective or rectificatory justice, and it operates by a completely different rule. Where distributive justice attends carefully to who a person is, corrective justice deliberately ignores it. In Nicomachean Ethics 11:32a he insists that when one person wrongs another, the law looks only to the harm done and treats the parties as equals, asking only whether one has inflicted and the other suffered injury. This is why, he says, it makes no difference whether a good man has defrauded a bad man or a bad man a good one. The judge does not ask who deserves more in general, but only how to restore the balance that was broken. Therefore the function of the judge is to act as a kind of living equality, taking from the one who has too much and giving back to the one who has too little, so that the original proportion is restored. What this reveals is striking, because the same philosopher who insisted that distribution must honor difference now insists that correction must be blind to it. And this apparent contradiction is precisely the point, because Aristotle understood that justice changes its shape depending on what it is doing. But if justice can demand attention to merit in one domain and blindness to merit in another, then we are forced to ask what justice fundamentally is, beneath all its forms. Here Aristotle makes the move that separates him most sharply from the way we usually think, because for him justice is not primarily a property of actions or laws, but a virtue of the person who acts. In the Nicomachean Ethics he treats justice as a hexis, a stable disposition of character, which means the just man is not the one who occasionally does a fair thing but the one who has formed the settled habit of giving each person what is due. This is why, he argues, you cannot reduce justice to mere rule-following, because a person might perform a just act by accident, under compulsion, or for selfish reasons, and such an act does not make him just. What makes a man just is that he chooses justice for its own sake, knowingly and from a firm character, exactly as the brave man chooses courage. Therefore the deepest question is never simply whether an act was fair, but whether it flowed from a just soul. And yet this places enormous weight on how character is formed, because virtue, for Aristotle, is built through repetition, by doing just acts until justice becomes second nature. What this reveals is that a society cannot legislate itself into justice, because no system of rules can replace the slow cultivation of just people. But there is one final application of all this that Aristotle reserves for the end, and it turns justice back upon the very self that practices it. Near the close of Book V, Aristotle asks a question that sounds almost paradoxical, namely whether it is possible for a person to commit injustice against himself. His answer is subtle and reveals the whole architecture of his thought, because strictly speaking, he says in Nicomachean Ethics 1138a, no one can suffer injustice voluntarily, and a man cannot be wronged with his own consent. And yet in a looser and deeper sense, he allows that there is a kind of internal justice, because the soul has parts, and the rational part may rule or fail to rule the appetites. This means that when reason governs the passions as it should, there is a kind of order and fairness within, but when appetite overrules reason, something like injustice has occurred inside the person. Therefore the man who destroys himself through excess or cowardice has, in a sense, treated a part of himself unjustly by denying it its proper share of governance. What this reveals is the most practical implication of the entire analysis, because justice is not only something we owe to others in courts and markets, but an order we must maintain within ourselves between reason and desire. The person who cannot rule himself, Aristotle implies, will never truly be just to anyone, because justice begins as an inner proportion before it can become an outer one. And this is the lesson most easily lost, that the first community we must govern justly is the one inside our own soul. What most people get wrong about justice is that they reduce it to a single idea, treating fairness as sameness, when Aristotle showed that justice is a structure with distinct parts, demanding proportion when we distribute and blindness when we correct, and that beneath both lies a virtue of character that no rule can substitute for. Justice, in the end, is not merely something a society arranges but something a person becomes, beginning with the inner order between reason and desire. The practical implication is direct. Before you measure the fairness of the world around you, examine whether you have established justice within yourself. Aristotle spent a lifetime studying what it means to live well. The least we can do is spend 10 minutes thinking about it. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking.